Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. Today I am doing a bit of a special video to celebrate my husband. It is his birthday today, and in celebration of that day I thought I would put out an appropriately themed book video that is kind of a gushing and recommendation about his favorite book series. Andrew is a huge fan of the Forgotten Realms series, but in particular, he loves the character of Drizzt Do'Urden. So Drizzt is the main character of the Dark Elf trilogy, and then has gone on to star in a variety of Forgotten Realms books following that. He originated as a side character in R.A. Salvatore's first published novel, which was The Crystal Shard, the first book in the Icewind Dale trilogy. But due to his immense popularity in that trilogy, R.A. Salvatore went on to write the prequel series, the Dark Elf trilogy, which chronologically is Drizzt's first story. And then, as I said, went on to write Drizzt into a bunch of other books. I have actually only read the Dark Elf trilogy. I didn't go on to read any more of the Forgotten Realms, but because today is Andrew's birthday and because there has not been a single live show, a single collaborative video, or a single problem on the Discord where he has not come in to troubleshoot things and make sure that I am on the right track, and because I know that he is the only person who has watched all of my videos except for my mom, then I thought that it would be fun to celebrate his favorite book on his birthday. Today's video is just going to be a short recommendations video, or a why you should read the Dark Elf trilogy by R.A. Salvatore. This is a really fun series. I read it for the first time when I was a late teenager. I know this is a gateway fantasy book for a lot of people, or a gateway fantasy series, but I was actually a little bit older when I read this for the first time, and I have not gone back to reread it. I think that I will go back to reread it because it's been almost 15 years now since I read it for the first time. And I think I would like to go on and read a little bit more in the Forgotten Realms just to experience a little bit of that, maybe go back and talk about the book and what I enjoyed about it, maybe even see if I can convince Andrew to come on and talk about something. I seriously doubt it's going to happen, but if it was going to happen for one thing, it would be for Drizzt. But if you have not read the Dark Elf trilogy, I'm going to give you some reasons why maybe you should add it to your TBR. And the very first reason is the most obvious reason. This is just a classic in the fantasy genre. If you're thinking of that kind of late 80s, early 90s classic fantasy, then I don't think that you could get by without paying some attention or giving some credence to the Forgotten Realms. The Forgotten Realms, for anybody who doesn't know, is one of the, if not the most popular setting for Dungeons and Dragons, and R.A. Salvatore was tasked with writing a book that took place in this landscape. And so, as I previously mentioned, the first book that he wrote was The Crystal Shard, which was the first book in the Icewind Dale trilogy. And the character of Drizzt was kind of thrown in there as a side character for Wulfgar the Barbarian, who was the main character in that series. And funnily enough, when Drizzt came into being, it was almost a complete coincidence, or it was completely by chance. Apparently, he had written his manuscript and sent it to his editor, and one of Wulfgar's companions, his editor felt was unusable. I don't know why, I don't know what it was about them that didn't fit the bill for what they were looking for, but she had called up R.A. Salvatore on the phone and said, "This character is unusable, I need something else right now, I'm going into this pitch meeting." And so, allegedly, off the top of his head, he said, "Okay, we're going to use a drow." And she thought, okay, a drow. And I will tell you a little bit about the drow in a second that may explain that reaction. And he said, "No, this is going to be good. He's just a side character. It's fine." And she said, "What is his name?" And allegedly, again, he said Drizzt Do'Urden, and denies that this was a character that he had made up for any campaign, that it just kind of came to him when he was on the phone under pressure. And obviously we know Drizzt went on to become a very popular character in the Icewind Dale, and then spawned this entire series of books on his own. But overall, I think that Drizzt is just one of those, or the Legend of Drizzt is one of those iconic stories. I think that if you want to go back and sample some of kind of peak 80s/early 90s fantasy, then this is a great place to start. I often think of it in conjunction with the Dragonlance books, but I have to say, if I put them head to head, if I had to decide like which to keep and which to toss, for me, I think that I prefer the Dark Elf trilogy. I would like to know if you are someone who has read a lot of classic fantasy and you have read both Dark Elf trilogy and the original Dragonlance books. Which ones would you prefer? Because I think for me, Drizzt comes out on top. And that is reason number 2. Drizzt is just an iconic character. If you're going to read these books for anything, then read them for Drizzt. I said before that Drizzt is a drow, so that is one of the races that you can play as in Dungeons and Dragons, and the drow are a race of dark elves. They live in the Underdark, so they live in the underground, and Drizzt is from this kind of major underground metropolis called Menzoberranzan. And Drizzt, his people, so the dark elves themselves, they live in this matriarchal society that is fueled by cruelty and vengeance. They're always involved in these kind of inter-house machinations. They're always trying to see who can come out on top, who can kind of topple an adversary house, who can scheme their way to the top of the totem pole. And the character of Drizzt is just antithetical to everything that the Dark Elves stand for. He is, by some miracle of the universe, he turns out to be this very kind-hearted, courageous soul who is invested in helping others and breaking down barriers. And I think that he's a really important character for that reason. If we look at the time in which this book was written, I think that Drizzt, I don't want to say paved the way, because there's lots of different books that have contributed to this, but I think it was a mainstream fantasy book that talked about important topics like prejudice and about judging people for what they look like instead of who they are, about stereotyping. And I think that Drizzt helped to bring a character to people that force them to look beyond those exterior characteristics. And I really enjoy watching Drizzt as he kind of pulls his own companions together, as he becomes part of a group, as he starts to break down those interspecies barriers over the course of his own series. And he's just a really fun character to follow. He is very highly skilled at combat. He dual wields. He has incredible speed. He has a great strategic mind. You know, is he a little bit overpowered? Yes, but that's part of the fun. That's part of the charm of Drizzt. And I think that it's just a lot of fun to watch him make his way through his journey and then build up his skills and become the warrior that you know he is going to be throughout the entirety of the series. So I think that you have to lay aside some of our kind of modern fantasy sensibilities where you want everything to kind of be gruelly worked for and earned, and you want to have these really morally gray characters. Like, I don't think you can go back and read The Legend of Drizzt through that same modern lens, but I think that you can go back and appreciate what a fun and cool character Drizzt is in his own right. Another reason why I think that this would be a great series to add to your TBR is that it is a very fast-paced palate cleanser. In a world where we're used to reading these giant fantasy tomes, we get these series of books that are kind of 800 plus pages each. There's this huge amount of world building and things that we need to get invested in. Sometimes it's nice to go back to those fast-paced palate cleansers. R.A. Salvatore is not going to win any Pulitzer Prizes for his prose, but it is serviceable and it really propels you through the narrative. My husband and I like to, we like to poke gentle fun. He really loves to use the word skitter. So often when he's talking about combat or kind of getting out of the way, there's a lot of skitters in the Dark Elf trilogy and in the Forgotten Realms in general. So if you have read those books and you have ever noticed that, please let me know. But I think it's just a really fast-paced book, and I think that it helps de-stress after some of those bigger and heavier fantasy tomes. Like I said, it's the kind of book that you can throw in on your TBR that doesn't take up a lot of mental space, but will hopefully give you a very rewarding reading experience regardless. The fourth reason why I think it would be fun to read the Dark Elf trilogy is the unique setting. If you are a Dungeons and Dragons player, then this will feel very familiar to you, and it may not feel fresh or unique in the same way. But when I read the Dark Elf trilogy for the first time, there were a lot of aspects of the world building that I really enjoyed. I really like the city of Menzoberranzan. I enjoy that kind of cruel matriarchal setup. That was the first time, I think it was the first time that I had ever read such an intensely matriarchal society, and especially one that was hinged on such brutal ideals and values. From the very opening scene, the opening scene of the first book of the Dark Elf trilogy is very dark, and that continues on whenever you are around the Drow or whenever you are in Menzoberranzan. But the first entry to this series takes place almost entirely underground, and you can feel that kind of oppressive darkness as you read through. And I think that that is a really fascinating setting and a really fascinating area to read about. Drizzt's family is as cruel as the rest. His mother, Matron Malice, is not a warm and comforting parental figure. And it's just, sometimes it's interesting to read books that have that vastly different worldview. We're very used to the idea of mothers being this kind of nurturing figure, being someone to support and help you grow. And so it's always fun when fantasy kind of flops those common tropes or those common ideas over on their head. So I think that the setup and the world building make for a really fantastic read. The number 5, so the 5th reason why I think that this would be an excellent book to add to your TBR is my personal favorite reason, and that is because there is an amazing animal companion. I don't know for everybody else, but Animal Companion is basically my YouTube or my booktube buzzword. If you tell me that a book has an animal companion, my desire to read it increases 100-fold. I can forgive a lot of flaws if I feel attached to an amazing animal companion. And I really like the animal companion in the Dark Elf trilogy. I don't know if I'm pronouncing this right, but as far as I can tell, Drizzt's, it's very difficult to plural or make that possessive, but the animal companion who spends time with Drizzt is an astral panther named Guinevere. I don't know if we're supposed to pronounce it Guinevere, Gwenvahar. I'm not sure. I do know that Ari Salvatore modeled the name or chose the name based on the Welsh spelling of Guinevere from the Arthurian legend. That is where he got that name. But I will call her Guinevere for this video. If that really bothers you, then please feel free to correct me in the comments with kind of a little phonetic spelling down there. But like I said, Guinevere is an astral panther, which is just at baseline a really cool concept for an animal companion. It essentially means that she can travel in and out of the astral plane, so she cannot be present physically next to Drizzt all the time, but through the use of magic, any magical totem, she is able to transport herself back and forth in and out of the astral plane. And obviously in books like that, that's going to lead to a lot of kind of dramatic reveals and popping in at opportune moments, but it's just, like I said, for the rest of it, it's just a lot of fun. I really love large animal companions. I think that they are really fun to follow, and just, you know, that animal loving part of my brain always feels happy when I see them on the page. Guinevere is a very loyal companion. She is very attached to Drizzt, very strong, able to lend him strength during periods of time where he really needs it. And Astral Panther, what else do I have to say? What else do I have to do to convince you that it's a good idea to read these books? For me, that's the only thing that I need. But if you have not been convinced yet, my final point is the same thing that I have reiterated throughout the entirety of this video, and that is just the Dark Elf trilogy is fun. When I deconstruct a book and I'm looking at its prose and I'm looking at the complexity of the plot and I'm looking at how original it is, all those things come together for me to give something a star rating. But sometimes, and I think that this is one of those times, you just have to let that go. You have to let it go and just allow yourself to read something for the pure enjoyment of it. Take off that critical lens and just dip your toe into fantasy. Remember why we fell in love with fantasy for the first time. Bring back those memories of playing D&D when you were a kid, or however you got into being a fantasy nerd. And I think that reading the Dark Elf trilogy is a fantastic way to do that. I am not saying that you are going to go into this and find something that completely blows you out of the water, something that feels totally original. I think that you're going to get exactly what it says on the tin. This is a classic fantasy romp with really cool combat, fun companions, an amazing animal companion, and a character who I think you will have a genuinely good time following. But I don't know if I have convinced you. In any case, I hope that Andrew has enjoyed watching this video. God knows he's watched a lot about books that he knows absolutely nothing about, so I'm sure it was good for once to watch about a book that he actually has read and actually cares about. I will see you with another video soon. Bye!